Okay, everyone, this is all you ever wanted to know about diodes and depletion zones, but were afraid to ask. Um, so I'm going to start out here with sort of a simple picture of a diode. There are two regions of the diode, the P region and the N region. We'll talk about that shortly. Right underneath is a schematic of a diode. You've got the arrow pointing. The arrow is on the P side. The cathode is on the N side. And you will note that this follows the standard convention of electricity in circuits, that current as a positive flow of charge goes from the left to the right here in the direction of the arrow. But of course, what's really physically happening, as you know, is that electrons are moving. And unfortunately, that means that when we think about it in terms of electrons, they're going the opposite direction of the arrow. The other key thing, and this is really, I'm going to try to drive this home throughout these slides, when you're forward biasing this diode, basically P is going to be positive. P is positive, N is negative. That's pretty straightforward, huh? Say it again. P is positive, N is negative. In reverse bias case, P is negative and N is positive, and there's no flow of current, which makes us sad. And I will explain why. So let's talk a little bit about what these P and N regions are. So the P and N stand for positive and negative. And essentially what that means is that the P region is a region that's rich in positive charge carriers, and the N region is rich in negative charge carriers. But, and this is the key thing to bear in mind, the positive charge carriers, those are the free charge carriers, but they're part of a larger atom. The P material is electrically neutral. And so the way to think about it is that you've got the core of the atom that is negative, and then the outside of the atom has a free positive charge that can move around. Similarly, for the N material, you've got negative charge carriers, i.e. electrons, that are free to move around. And so to talk about my notation here, the picture of the gray circle with the minus sign is essentially everything contained in the atom, the nucleus, but also all of the electrons, but then there's an extra electron in this p-doped material that creates a free hole that can move around. And so the holes move around, but the core, remember this is like a crystal lattice, the core of the crystal lattice has to stay in place, and that is negative. And then similarly, you've got, so yeah, the whole thing is, of course, neutral. And similarly, you've got a positive core on the N side with a free extra electron floating around the place that can move around. The whole thing, again, is net neutral. But, of course, you've got this core of the rest of the atom that has a net positive charge and can't move around. What happens if you put these guys together? Well, this seems pretty okay. Oh no, watch out. The positive and negative charges are annihilating each other, and they're gone. So the positive and negative charges, the electrons and holes, get pulled to each other, they annihilate each other, and you'll notice that these leave behind the cores of the atoms, and the P side now is left with a net negative, and the N side is left with a net positive. This means there's an internal electric field in a region called the depletion region or the depletion zone. You will note that the other electrons and holes would like to annihilate with each other, but now that this depletion region is in the way, they can't cross. And so the process is self-limiting. A depletion region forms, but then it doesn't continue to grow boundlessly. Okay, so this is what our diode looks like. We put this P region and this N region together. The P region had free positive charge carriers. The N region had free negative charge carriers. When they were put in close contact with each other, they annihilated, created this depletion region with an internal field. In a silicon-based diode, that field strength is going to be 0.7 volts. And that's where we're at. Now, how do we use this component electrically? Well, we want to try to apply a current through it. So how do we do that? Well, let's start by going with a forward bias. So forward biasing, as I said, the way to remember, P is positive. You apply a positive voltage to the P side and a negative voltage to the N side. Now here's how it works. If you apply this voltage, you will get a current conditional that the voltage is at least higher than the voltage of the internal field. Because remember, the internal field is going the opposite way. It's sort of like if you put two batteries in series and they're facing opposite directions and one is much bigger than the other, then you still get a net flow of current. It's just the voltage is a little bit less. So anyway, you need more voltage than that 0.7 to overcome the 0.7. But once you do, you can push negative charges from the right-hand side in the N region into the P region. And when you do, you replace them with a negative charge that's coming from your battery. Okay. Similarly, you can think of it this way. Every time you push a positive charge out of the P region and into the N region, you're replacing that positive charge so that the diode remains essentially neutral. And current can flow freely going this way. Positive charges go from the P to the N, they travel through the N, they come out the negative terminal, and they continue along the circle minding their business. Similarly, with the negative charges exit the N material and go into the P material and continue along until they exit the diode on the positive side and follow their path. But every time one electron leaves, another electron follows close behind. So again, this stays neutral. Now what happens if we reverse bias it? Okay, so reverse biasing, we're applying a negative voltage to the P side and a positive voltage to the N side. No longer P is positive and therefore no longer forward biased. Negative attracts positive, and so you can imagine that these free positive charge carriers in the P side want to escape. So they do. And then all the positive charge carriers move over, but you'll notice that positive charges left, but there was nothing to replace them because there are no positive charge carriers on the N side, and moreover, there is the depletion region, so even if there were positive charge carriers on the N side, it's hard to get them over. So you've got this now net negative charge that has grown on the P side, and similarly on the N side, the electrons want to go the opposite direction, and now they leave a region of positive lattice points in the crystal that are not replaced. There's no replacement of electrons, and so the depletion region actually grows. And if you think about it this way, if you apply a voltage in this reverse bias mode, the depletion region is eventually going to grow to the point where that internal field is equal to the external field, and then no current will flow. The way I like to think about this is it's sort of like you're pulling opposite ends of a spring. You know, you're trying to pull positive charges out without replacing them, and you're pulling them one way. You're trying to pull negative charges out without replacing them. Positives and negatives want to pull towards each other, and so eventually, if you're trying to pull them apart, they're going to pull back to the point where you cannot pull any further, and you reach a stasis point, and there's no current. Now, if you were to apply a big enough voltage, eventually you'll get breakdown, and then your diode is broken, and then you're unhappy. And I'm unhappy, and that doesn't really solve any problems. So that's basically the idea, is that if you're applying a charge, if you're applying a voltage that is opposite the charge carriers on either side of the diode, then those charge carriers want to leave, but they leave out the back and there's nothing to replace them, and that leaves a net charge inside each of the P and the N regions, and that counteracts whatever you're trying to do, and you don't get a current. Okay? So if you keep applying bigger and bigger voltages, that depletion region will grow and grow and grow. So anyway, let's recap. Forward biasing, P is positive. If you apply the voltage to the P region, a positive voltage to the P region, you're forward biasing your diode. Forward biasing the diode, current flows in a natural, smooth way because you're essentially pushing positive charges from the positive terminal of your voltage into the P region, but then you're pushing positive charges out of the P region into the N region and then back out of the N region to the negative terminal. Okay, and you could think of it the other way too, that you're pushing negative charges the other way. But the key point is every charge that leaves the P region is replaced so that you have a net neutral situation. And as long as the voltage is high enough to overcome the barrier created by the depletion zone, you're good to go and you get a current. Now, if you reverse bias, meaning you're applying the opposite, so no more P is positive, you're applying a negative on one side and a positive on the other, the positive charges in the P side want to go to the negative terminal, the negative charges want to go to the positive terminal, and the opposite way. There's nothing to replace them, the depletion zone grows, you get this internal field that sort of counteracts anything you're trying to do, and you don't get a net current. And so that's how it works. In the next step, we're going to look at how this applies to JFETs. But before we could even start to discuss JFETs and MOSFETs, we needed to understand this concept. And I hope this makes it a little bit clearer for you. Boom.